Just very briefly, Kate Auty is my name, and I'm up in Benalla from Tangarong country where I live in Euroa. I live and work in Euroa, work with a lot of community groups, and I've got some other irons in the fire, and I'm essentially a background lawyer. So, Dean, that's my background, and I don't want to say any more, and if people want to look it up, they can. I was given a whole lot of stuff to say about you, but I think you probably can introduce yourself without me doing it. So over to you for an introduction.
Thanks a lot for that, Kate, and thank you for the opportunity to come and speak today. Yeah, so my name's Dean Parkin. I'm the campaign director for the Yes23 Campaign Alliance. I'm a Quandamooka man from here on Minjerribah, which is also known as North Strait Island. So I have the great privilege of living and working on country and being around family, which is at the moment in this campaign, really important centering and grounding thing for me to have, because obviously things are starting to ramp up. I won't go through my CV, my professional history. It's all on LinkedIn, and it's just the sort of run of the mill stuff. Needless to say, I'm part of this campaign. I'm passionate about this referendum because I was involved in the lead up to the Uluru Statement from the Heart. I was a co-facilitator for the 12 regional dialogues and then the Uluru Constitutional Convention itself back in 2017. And the thing that gets me going and the thing that drives me in this campaign and the thing that I come back to when it gets really, really tough, which it does, is remembering what all of those men and women from around the country talked about, why recognition and why a voice was important to them. We had people from urban, regional, remote areas across the country, some very traditionally grounded people, all the way through to, international experts in constitutional law. And as we go through this referendum, and as we've seen over the last few months, the sort of narrative shifting, people talked about this with respect to the importance of their kids, of their young people, about why this is important to their families. So that's why I've been involved in this campaign for the last 6 years. That's why it's a great privilege for me to be involved as the campaign director with a wonderful team, including Emily Home, who you'll hear from later on today. So yeah, that's just a bit about me and where I've come from and what's driving me and many others in this campaign.
Yeah, thanks, Dean. Look, a big shout out to Emily, who is coming on later. Emily was instrumental in us running our Euroa Yes picnic in February. She was fantastic. So thanks to you and all the team, Dean, because you're there and you're helping us get the sort of stuff done we know we need to do. What crucial actions, this particular forum really is probably looking to you for some advice about what actions people can take. What do you want to recommend to us? Is there any specific channel we should be following?
Well, yeah, and again, I won't go too far into the details on this because Emily will speak to it in great detail. And Emily is the national field organizer, the field lead, so she's driving the ground campaign for us at the moment. One of the things I'd just like to emphasise is the importance of the current context of the campaign in which we're operating. So, we've seen over the last few months, we've seen a couple of things. We've seen the numbers tighten in terms of the support, which we always knew they would. We've seen, because this was always going to become a more contested space as we move throughout the referendum campaign. And part of the reason why that's happened also is because the current debate has been very much focused on the kind of Canberra bubble, political, legal parts of this that in some ways are actually quite necessary. So the work over the last few months has been very much focused on getting the constitutional provision right. What's the actual change to the constitution, and getting the referendum question right. But what that's meant is that it's this narrative in the campaign has been dominated by politicians and lawyers, and in a way, the conversation has been spoken above our heads. It's actually kind of cut out the people, and so it's been tough for us to cut through while that noise is really been on the boil. Now that's coming to an end. The provision has been settled. It's gone through the lower house. It'll go through the Senate, and we believe it'll probably pass the parliament and trigger the actual referendum campaign sometime on the 21st or 22nd of June. So once that's done, well, we're already transitioning the conversation from Canberra back out into the community. So it's really important context, because that then drives a lot of the work that we're trying to do now, which is foster the conversation at that community level. You know, we're over 7,000 volunteers signed up to the campaign. We've got about more than 50 local groups that have signed up, sort of, you know, let's say, you know, Redlands for yes, across the country. We've had kitchen table conversation training being rolled out. We've got town halls being rolled out across the country as well. So it's just about Bradfield for yes. There's Nicolette there. Yep. So it's about driving that community level conversation. We've got to really just distance ourselves from the politics, and also understand that they're very two different conversations. So if you just get caught up in the media frenzy around this and the political frenzy around this, it's saying one thing, and it's quite cynical, and it's very politicized, and it's getting pretty unsavory in some parts. Out in the community, it's a completely different conversation. It is a completely different conversation. There's a lot more curiosity. There's a lot more goodwill. And so what we've got to do is we've got to tap into that. We've got to tap into that and make people feel comfortable about being involved in the conversation, because ultimately it's not about what the Prime Minister or the Leader of the Opposition says, or the columnists that are in a bit of a frenzy. It's the voters out in the community where we've got to bring this conversation down. So that's the kind of context in which the campaign's operating at the moment.
Yeah, so the infrastructure's done, really. We shouldn't be too fussed about the infrastructure. People shouldn't get too bogged down in the constitutional debate that's happening or has been happening. They should just basically start talking to their peers. Is that one of the recommendations you've got?
It absolutely is. Understand that it's a very simple provision. Understand that the overwhelming weight of the expert legal opinion says that it's safe. Now, of course, there are going to be individual other experts and commentators that will argue the toss on this all the way through to the referendum, and probably will be continuing to argue differences of legal opinion after the referendum. But the overwhelming weight of legal opinion says that the question and the provision as drafted is safe. It is in accordance with the Constitution, and we believe, very importantly, it's capable of being won at a referendum. So, and a lot of work has gone into that. So yeah, the question, it's very simple. It's important to note that we're not voting on a model. We're not voting on details. We're not voting on options, A voice, B voice, C voice. We're saying to the Australian people, it's the job of the Australian people at the referendum to go, there should be one. That's it. There should be one. There should be a voice, and there should be recognition for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples in the Constitution. It's as simple as that. Yeah. So yes, the infrastructure, the mechanism, it's settled. It's settled, it's safe, and it's strong. And as we say, we think it's capable of being achieving that successful yes vote, probably in around October this year.
Yeah, and I suppose you're getting around and hearing from people all over the place, Dean. So what are you actually hearing that might give people real promise for what can be coming through from the community? What are you hearing?
Well, on the recognition piece, it's very, very strongly supported. People get the idea that we should recognise Indigenous peoples as the first peoples of this country. In fact, it's actually a source of pride. People are actually proud of the fact that we're home to the oldest continuous culture on Earth. Funnily enough, even some of those in the no camp agree that the recognition piece is important. So understand that that's the bit that speaks to people's hearts. That's the emotional driver, the emotional connection for many people to this issue. And then when you get to the voice part, we're talking about, you know, people are talking about the practical change. Look, and there is definitely a shared sense of frustration across the board that we haven't gone further down the road on progressing issues such as health and education. People don't necessarily know the statistics. In fact, I've watched a couple of focus groups, and it is pretty astounding to realize that even on things like the Closing the Gap strategy, which has been in existence for more than a decade now, bipartisan commitment to it, there are very, very low levels of awareness about those kinds of things in the Australian community. So there's not a great deal of, I guess, if you like, intellectual understanding of the challenges, but there's a sense from many people that Indigenous people aren't getting a fair go, as we should in 2023. And so, and what's currently on offer at the moment isn't working. So, you know, yeah, we should give Indigenous people a voice so we can actually crack through some of these issues. So that's why I'm saying the conversation at the ground level compared to the political level is just so different. It's much more simplified. I've been asked a few times in the media, we've had an ad running in the field for the last 6 weeks, and they say, well, why doesn't the ad say The Voice in the actual ad? It says, give Indigenous people a real say in our futures, because that's how people are talking about it on the ground. They're saying, yeah, we should give Indigenous people a say in their futures. So the thing that gives me confidence is that there is that emotive connection, and it's a far more simpler and straightforward conversation when you're actually out there in the community. And when you break it down very simply, people get it, and there's a lot of curiosity, and that's even from some people that might have come into the conversation with reservations, that might be even soft nose. They come in, they hear the simplicity, and they go, yeah, that sounds about right. So yeah, there's a lot to be optimistic about.
It's actually really interesting to hear you say soft nose, because we're hearing a bit in the community about, oh, I'm uncertain. And there's a lot of uncertain people who I think are a bit of a hard no, actually. I don't know whether it's a distraction or a deviation from the norm, but a soft no is a person who you seriously are telling us is uncertain and persuadable.
Oh, completely. The numbers broadly at this point in time, there is a lot of softness, both in some of the yes and the no. In some places it's hardening, but generally speaking, there's softness in those places, and it is probably more due to uncertainty and lower levels of engagement up until this point. You'd expect there to be softness because we're 5 months out from the actual vote itself. So there is still, even though when you say 5 months, and somebody broke it down into days the other day to when we think the referendum is, that gets the pulse racing a little bit. But it's actually a little way down the track. There will be time to persuade those people, absolutely. But we're also not going to just be able to leave it to the last couple of weeks like you would an election and just lift the activity there. We have to ramp up our activity now to start persuading some of those people. And and this is really, really important, actually, and I think this may be a distinctive feature of this campaign that we might not see in others. Because of that low level of awareness of the issues, and because there are many non-Indigenous Australians that don't have a close connection to an Indigenous person, there is an incredible amount of, I use the word awkwardness, from people approaching this issue. They're awkward because they don't know much about it, more broadly. They're awkward because they don't want to say the wrong term. So, if they walk into a conversation and they say, the Aborigines, and fear that maybe they're going to get pulled up or put into line. And I've come across so many people that are like that. And sitting in behind that awkwardness is somebody that wants to vote yes. They actually want to vote yes. But the way that we bring these people in and the way that we engage them has to be welcoming. We have to suspend our instinct at times to pull them into the politically correct line or the politically correct terms, because it might just put them in a very defensive position. So the approach that we have to take on this is we can't cast the net for a 51-49 result. We have to cast the net out for an 80 result and try and bring as many of those people in as we possibly can.
And in doing that, it's really interesting to hear you say that there's awkwardness, because there's a lot of people out there who really aren't what you would describe as dyed-in-the-wool racists, who really are still challenged by the referendum. I would have thought that's pretty evident. And when you say they're awkward, and we need and they're trying to be careful about what they say, then
Yep.
we need to bring them in and not, as you say, turn them into a defensive protagonist who really just says, well, oh, okay, damn it, I'm off, basically. So are there any particular ways that you've been trying to do that with people? How is it just taking longer to listen? Is it
you do have to take the time to listen. You really do have to take the time to listen. And obviously, you know, it's all about yes. But in those early parts of some of those conversations, pardon me, it's also just about listening. You know, when you're doing I'll give you a bit of an analogy. When you're doing a conversation, if you're doing a meeting or a session with Indigenous people in community, so you actually have to dedicate a fair bit of the upfront time in the conversation, just to allow people to have their say and get things off their chest. We'll walk into a room to do a certain purpose, but ultimately you just got to let people clear things off their chest before you then sit down and have the conversation. And in some ways, we've got to do it similar here, which is we've got to allow people to walk in and maybe even express some of that awkwardness. Maybe they're even expressing that in terms of opposition, and they're expressing it in terms of doubt and skepticism, and just hearing them out and allowing them to say that, and then providing the information and the context, and engage in the conversation, and even leave the conversation on terms that might be that they still haven't changed their mind. But the idea that they've had a respectful conversation where they've been heard, it's just so important. So I just really encourage, the active listening. It's the dignifying people's participation in this is at the center of what we all have to do. And look, I'm not going to lie, sometimes that's really challenging, right? Sometimes that's really challenging, and you end up wearing quite a bit of, I don't know, you can wear a fair bit to get to that point. But we've got no other way. We're not going to be able to hit people over the head with yes placards and expect them to turn their vote. It's not going to happen.
It's actually, in a way, with that active listening, taking the time to listen to people who, as you say, might be presenting some fairly challenging views to particularly an Indigenous person, but also non-Indigenous people who take umbrage. It's about actually creating relationships and trying to do it quickly in circumstances where you've got to hasten slowly to get to the outcome.
Yeah, you absolutely do. And look, I know we're focusing at the moment a lot on those people that are undecided or potentially even soft-nosed. Understand also that more often than not, when you enter into a conversation with somebody, you're going to get there's a fair bit of goodwill out there for this. Even if there's low levels of awareness or low levels of understanding more broadly, there is an extremely large amount of just native goodwill that is sitting there. And so I would assume that people are up for the conversation. I'd assume that they're happy to engage with you on it, and assume that in there, there's a groundswell of very, very quiet people who will be very favorably inclined to voting yes. And our job is to give them the confidence, to engage them, to activate them, and bring them into the conversation. And I think some of those people become our strongest champions, because they know what it's like to feel like a quiet supporter or a kind of, a mild-mannered supporter, not like somebody like me that's bashing away out there in the media all the time. It's actually good to have the quieter community members as our messengers, trusted messages, giving trusted messages across.
And when you talk about native goodwill, it's really interesting, Dean, because of course that takes us straight to the question of people understanding this is the fair thing to do. This is actually the fair and equitable, in a way, in inverted commas, Aussie thing to do. And that's going to appeal to people. And we're seeing it come through in the sports teams coming on side, I would have thought. Now, you've obviously put a lot of work into that, and it seems to me that it's going to carry some people who might otherwise not be terribly interested in what's happening with the referendum.
Yeah, absolutely. That fair go line has been a very strong message for us. The importance of it is that it's actually connected to something like that people consider it like an Australian value. So this is why some of the opponents that have tried to dismiss this as, we're trying to win this on the vibe, they misunderstand how values driven that feeling actually is. It's not just a shallow level of goodwill support. It's rooted in a deeper sense of the fair go, and the sense that Indigenous people haven't had a fair go, that it's time for one, and also coupled with the sense that there's no skin off my nose. I get to vote yes. I get to vote for recognition. I get to go vote for a voice. It seems like the fair and the right thing to do. And then once I've written yes, I've got my list of things I've got to go get at Bunnings later on in the afternoon on polling day, and go to the shops and go to the kids' sport, and life will go on. And for a lot of people, that's actually sufficient. It's actually a reason for them to go. So that's what I mean. Keep it very, very simple. Keep it very, very simple. Steer. I mean, you're going to obviously end up talking to lawyers and people that will think that, and this is no shot at lawyers, because
have
help us get to where we've got to.
Yeah.
I'm not going to have a shot at the lawyers, but the questions around the provision and stuff like that, engage on a reasonable level on that sort of stuff. But more often than not, it will be, this just feels like it's the right thing to do. Feels like it's something that can bring the country together, and we get to do something practical. We get to, hopefully make an improvement for people's lives.
Yeah.
It can be as simple as that.
Yeah, you're interested that the point about people have a vote, then go down to Bunnings and it's no skin off my nose. That's really fascinating, because I think that there's a lot of people out there who really recognise that's the case, that you get this done. And in fact, what then happens is Aboriginal people become far more responsible for their own issues than they currently are permitted to be, as we see things now. So it's about actually shifting responsibility back to Aboriginal people and saying, here you go. This is where you're really going to get cut through. Do you hear that much, that there's a bit of an interest in making sure that Aboriginal people actually are responsible for the things that they think are important about Indigenous issues?
Yeah, absolutely, and it's coupled with this sense of, and that thing of not really understanding, people knowing that these things are way more complex than how they're sometimes presented. That some of the challenges, and particularly when you add remoteness into those challenges as well, because we know that with the issues for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, there's actually gaps in the gap. So urban Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have slightly less worse outcomes than those in the regions, and then the poor old mob that are out in the remote areas, they're doing it really tough. So there's a sense that there's complexity, that there's been a lot of effort over the years trying to make this work. There's frustration that it hasn't worked, and that if we can just try this and give it a go, then that's better than just doing what we're doing right now. So it's very simple. It's not, these aren't great big policy analysis of the referendum or the question. It's just like, you know what, we should just do this, and expect that this is going to be a good thing for people and families.
A couple of people have raised with me the fact that this would simply be a repeat of the ATSIC days. Now, very evidently, constitutional recognition changes the whole complexion of this conversation. Are you hearing anybody come at you about the ATSIC issue at all?
Well, yeah, I'd like to talk about that on a number of levels. Firstly, ATSIC, by and large, in an overwhelming sense, was a success. It was actually a very good thing. Now, there were elements of it that were wrong and needed fixing, but instead of fixing them, the response was to abolish it. Now, even the minister that signed the paper that abolished ATSIC only a couple of years ago, Senator Amanda Vanstone, she came out a couple of years ago and said abolishing ATSIC was a mistake. so even though, and I understand that, you know, it's kind of been demonized in such a way that you sort of worry even mentioning the word ATSIC, but the reality is, on some of the measures we've gone backwards since ATSIC was abolished, because we've lost that intelligence and insight from Indigenous people on the issues that affect our community. So the other thing to understand is that ATSIC was a very different model to The Voice. The Voice won't be delivering services or programs or that sort of stuff. It will be providing advice to parliaments and governments. And the other thing about the other thing about ATSIC is, and some of the other bodies that have gone before, they've all been a creation of governments and parliaments. They've all been political conceptions. This is very different. The Voice has been proposed by Indigenous peoples, and the power that will bring the Voice to life is the Australian people. It's not the politicians. In fact, it's the people telling the politicians through the Constitution, this is important. We've got to have a voice. Make sure you get this right. And that was very deliberate. That was very deliberate, because we've left it to the politicians previously and they can't get it right. They've proven that, which is why we issued the Uluru Statement from the heart to the Australian people, not to the Prime Minister of the day. We said, actually, yeah, we know that 8 out of 44 referendum questions have been successful. It's a hard thing to do, but we think it's better that we go through the Australian people and get the mandate from the Australian people and do this through a referendum than just leaving it to the politicians, because it doesn't work. That's why this is necessarily a people's movement, because it's the people that will decide it at the end of the day.
And it's a great way to put it. It's a mandate from the Australian people, because it puts the responsibility back on all of us. And it means that we can't just sort of slough it off and say, well, politicians did it or Parliament did it. It's actually about what we do. And it's about what we individually think we really regard as a fair thing. There's been a really good support from Multicultural Australia too. So you've worked pretty hard to make sure that that's come on board, or has that just been a really generous offering up of support, Dean? How's that come about?
It's a combination, but again, the groundswell is from the communities themselves. And over years, we've had different multicultural and ethnic groups get them behind and support this. And in fact, a little while ago, you know, in a fairly cynical move, it was suggested that we should also recognise all of the migrant communities and ethnic communities in a kind of, it was a pretty cynical attempt to wedge them against the Indigenous community, and they came out very strongly, very quickly, and said, no, don't use us as a wedge. We back Indigenous constitutional recognition. This is the task at hand. Let's get on with it. So there's been broad support across the different communities, and to see that 120 organisations come out on Wednesday and express that in a statement was absolutely tremendous. And of course, there's been some work in behind sort of making that happen, but it's been powered by those communities wanting to be involved, and I think it's a really important message that people who may not have had, 5 or 6 generations of connection to this country, that have a more recent connection to Australia, coming out and saying that recognition and a voice is important to them, I think sends a very, very powerful message to us in terms of encouraging us on and to the broader community.
It's actually about the sort of Australia they want to see, isn't it? For themselves, their communities, their kids. It's real. That 120 organisations statement was really extraordinarily powerful in a range of ways for some of us non-Aboriginal people as well. The demographic of people you're seeing who are in the yes camp already, Dean, is there a breakdown where you might say to us there's a particular demographic that we should be really trying to work with in all of this, who are not persuaded at the moment?
Well, so we've got to press on every single one of them, but I'll give some insights into sort of what's happening there. So it's probably no surprise that support's greatest at a younger age, and then it kind of gradually diminishes over time. Women are most supportive of the yes vote at the moment. Men over the age of 55 are our toughest group that we have to get into. So we really want to do some work there. And also we know that for women sort of 35 to 54, so that really important, very, very important demographic that are influential at elections, increasingly so influential at elections now. We think there's something going on there with obviously cost of living is a really big is like the number one focus on people's minds right now, and many of the women in that demographic are concerned about the impact of cost of living on families and households, and so we're really keen to engage that group in a really deep and meaningful way. And there are some getting that connection for how this is important for Indigenous mothers and young families and babies. We see things like the closing the gap target for healthy birth weights for Indigenous children. Obviously, there's a significant disadvantage there, and that they're struggling to meet that target right now. In fact, it's not on track at the moment to actually close the gap. So having conversations with people about those kinds of issues really drives it home, connects it to something that's real, and says, oh, well, we should be doing something about that. We should actually be, that's why this voice can help that out. So that's just some general observations on the demographics. Basically, at this stage, we need to push on all of them. And I guess really also mobilize those young people and get them out in force and driving that support more broadly, because they're out in front leading the support for it at the moment.
Yeah, in the time we've got left, Dean, I wonder if you wouldn't like to just talk us through what getting to the Uluru Statement meant for you. You were very involved in that process, and we don't want to lose the power and impact of the work that went into that in the conversation about yes, because they're intimately entwined. How do you sort of feel about the fact that Uluru brought so many people together and what it's done?
Yeah, it's a really good question and really, really timely, because I was out there last Friday. Head's spinning a bit at the moment. And went out there to celebrate, or not celebrate, but to mark the 6th anniversary of the Uluru statement. It reminded me of it brought me back to the intention that's behind all of this, and that's really important, because the moment, again, that political conversation's very cynical, and it betrays a lack of trust in Indigenous people that we actually want to get this right ourselves. I mean, all of this fear mongering about the scope of the voice, and we'll be stopping the army from defending the country, and all of this sort of nonsense that's been cast about has kind of tried to imply a negative intention about what this is all about. And being back at Uluru reminded me of is very different. It's almost anachronistic to think that the statement was issued in the spirit of faith, love, and hope. That's where it come from. That's what drove the intention behind it. And even just saying those words now, you think about some of the nature of the debate, and it just feels so distant and dislocated from that right now. But that is absolutely where it come from. And as I said, it was a coming together of all of those Indigenous peoples, absolutely magnificent. But the really strategically smart and generous thing that it did was it went to the people. And we just cannot lose sight of that we put our faith in the Australian people. we chose the hard route in a way in going to a referendum. We could have just had a laundry list of all of the issues and concerns that faced our communities and then issued it to the Prime Minister and said, oh, let's just sort of fix it through, the normal ways. And we got to that point and just said, no, that's not going to cut it anymore. We've got to take this moment and go to the real bosses of this country, which is the Australian people. We've got to go over the heads of the politicians and put it to the real bosses. So it reminded me of that. I think I know we got that right. I think that's the right strategy and it was the right intention. And our job now is to make it happen.
Yeah, and to make it happen this time is going to be a challenge. We've all sort of recognised that. But putting your faith in the Australian people and saying the real bosses are you. I mean, that's just such a lovely Aboriginal phrase for what this is all about, really. The real bosses are us. It was fascinating for us to have Uncle Herbie Patton at our Euroa Yes picnic, and he was there actually to play music for us. But he said, I want to talk. And he stepped up to talk about the 1967 referendum. And he talked so movingly about it that you couldn't have come away from that particular presentation ad hoc, just completely off the cuff about what it meant for him, how it, in a way, changed his understanding of his place in this country, not as this one will, but it nevertheless did. And it was really... It was marvellous of him to share with us how he felt about that. So I think one of the things that non-Aboriginal people need to keep repeating back to yourselves and all the people who are running the campaign from the Indigenous perspective is thank you. Just thank you for trying to make us a better country, and thank you for doing it in circumstances where we haven't really come to grips with truth-telling, and we won't for some time. So that's going to be an ongoing challenge for us. And treaty is coming together around the country on the state basis, and ultimately we'll see that arrive as well, which will be something that, again, Aboriginal people, the real bosses of Aboriginal people's lives, will come up with solutions for that. So I suppose this is the solution for some of our problems in this country created by colonialism. It's not the solutions for everything, but it's definitely something that people have really thrown their hearts and souls into. So just a big thank you, a real thank you, Dean, for what people have done. And I suppose it just finally on the Uluru Statement, it wasn't easy to get a whole lot of people up there to Uluru for park their lives, put aside sorry business, put aside work, be there, converse with each other across some difficult matters, no doubt, but come to the statement in a way that demonstrates a gift to the rest of us. So thanks for that.
Thank you. Can I just say one other thing, Kate? And I think this is really, I really want to get this point across. And to that point, I want everybody to feel okay with the fact that there's going to be differences of opinion amongst Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Now, I've seen good-willed people. I've seen people who would consider themselves highly progressive absolutely freeze and be paralysed when they hear an Indigenous person say that they don't support the voice. I want to say a couple of things. Differences of opinion in this amongst our own people is completely and utterly natural. And in fact, it's a sign of health in our communities. This idea that we should all be 100% on board before we do anything is a nonsense. And the differences of opinion too readily and too easily get conflated with division. So it's like we can't have a difference of opinion amongst our own people without being called a divided people. Whereas every other society on earth has things like parliaments to mediate and moderate differences of opinion, right? That's the whole foundation of democracy. So just understand that. And in fact, I'll go a step further. Dissent in our community is actually critical because it keeps those like myself and others who are involved in campaigns like this honest to make sure that we're doing what we need to do. So don't be scared of differences of opinion amongst blackfellas. Certainly don't use it as an opinion to sit on the fence. That's actually, I'm going to be straight, as a cop-out.
Mm.
We haven't been doing decades of work of reconciliation, preparing people for these big issues so that people can pull a pin and cop out when it comes to the crunch. It's okay to have your own belief and conviction in supporting this and say, yes, you do want to respond to the invitation from the Uluru Statement. Yes, you do want to vote yes for a voice, and have that in respectful disagreement with another Indigenous person.
Yeah.
That is the challenge. That is the task that we all have to do. It is what we need to do if we are to take that next step in recognition and reconciliation, and also understand that at the end of the day, consistently, we've had about 80% of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people support this. So we've done an incredible amount of work. We need to do more to bring more mob on board. But I want you to be prepared for that moment when you are out there campaigning, that you get an Indigenous person that says no, they don't agree with you, and be okay with holding that in respectful disagreement. That's the challenge for all the non-Indigenous people that want to get them behind and support this, because I have to do it. I have to do that with my own community. I have to do that with other Indigenous people that don't support. So we're all in this together, and just hold on to that and hold on to your conviction in your support for this campaign.
Thanks, Dean. A lot of people have come on the chat to say they really needed, in a way, to hear you tell them about that. I think that's been really productive. Jill's with us, so she's going to close us down in a minute. Can I just say again, thank you to everybody who's been guiding all of us on this. It's a critical time for our country. It's about making our country a better place, and it's about a better place for all of us. But the generosity that is evident in what you are all doing from the Indigenous perspective is not lost on many of us. So thank you. Jill.
Oh, yeah. Look, I just want to say, oh, wow, oh, wow, oh, wow, oh, wow. How bloody good was that? That was just such a great conversation, so full of heart, which is what this is all about. So thank you, Dean, for being with us. Not only can we see what you've done and what has been done, but we can clearly see what we have to do and how important it is that our community does the work now. So community political action, that would be yes, wouldn't it? Thanks, Dean. And thank you, Kate, for bringing all of you to that conversation. It was so valuable for two intelligent, connected people to be able to share that wisdom with us.